Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Long COVID podcast. I'm really excited to be joined today by Lizzie, who is going to talk about her recovery. So we're going to find out what worked, what didn't, what life looks like now, and all of that sort of stuff. So again, just a reminder, this isn't medical advice. This is just one person's experience, and there will be tons of useful stuff, I'm sure, for everybody here. So a very warm welcome to the podcast, Lizzie. It's so cool to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to chat to you.
Amazing. So to start with, would you just say a little bit about yourself and maybe what life was like before you got unwell?
Sure. So I got COVID in July 2022 at my sister's wedding. Leading up to that, I was, probably at my most active that I've ever been. I was training for a triathlon. I was doing well at work, had a busy career and social life, and was kind of one of those people that put 110% into sort of every aspect of my life. So I was busy, I was fulfilled, um, and yeah, it was having a really good time. Um, and yeah, then I that got COVID in July, and initially wasn't actually that unwell. I'd kind of say it was not dissimilar from flu symptoms. My main symptom was fatigue. Um, it just hit me, kind of absolutely floored me. And I spent probably a couple of weeks with flu-like symptoms and fatigue, um, which kind of ended up not going away. Um, but I think I was, as I said, one of those people that, you know, was a bit of a energizer bunny doing loads of things and not someone who's hugely comfortable with taking time off work. So I wanted, to get back to work as soon as I could, get on with things. Um, I didn't mention actually that I I caught COVID, sort of knowing this with hindsight, at my sister's wedding, and felt a little bit unwell the week after, but hadn't tested positive yet. And I actually, which sounds crazy, actually completed a triathlon that weekend, and I hadn't tested. And I don't know, the day after I tested positive for long COVID, for COVID. So probably not a good start to my COVID journey because, doing a physical challenge like that when, that it was probably in my system, is not a great idea because I was putting my body under a lot of stress. But that gives you the indication of the sort of character that I was. And I say was because I've had a huge journey and transformation in kind of understanding how mad that is when you're not feeling well to do a triathlon. Um, but yeah, so a little bit of context about where this started.
Yeah, and you know what? I can totally relate to that because me of what 5 years ago or something would have done exactly the same thing. I don't have time to be sick. I'm
Yeah.
gonna go climb that mountain anyway because the sun is shining, and I live in Scotland. We don't get that much sun, so we have to use it when we get it. So yeah, absolutely relate to that. And I think you sort of feel like you're wasting time, don't you, when you're sitting around doing nothing?
Yeah,
And I completely relate as well to what you said about this kind of transformation where, viewing rest as productive,
yes.
but it's very difficult to come to that, I think, if you are so completely opposite to that beforehand. Yes. Um, so yeah, you became unwell with COVID and obviously long COVID because that's why we're here.
Yeah,
Um, Sort of later on, you said 2022, didn't you? So that was kind of a
yeah.
bit over 2 years into the pandemic. So I'd be interested just to know from your perspective, you must have heard of long COVID before you got it. But how aware of it were you, and how did that kind of feel when you then started not getting better?
Yeah, I had heard of it. I think I probably felt like it was something that was unlikely to affect me
Mm.
personally because I was in really good health, and fit and active. Um, so yeah, I had heard of it, and a relative of mine had ME, so I'm kind of probably more aware than most. Um, and I've actually also had some kind of tropical diseases in the past, which have resulted in a period of short fatigue. But um, so yes, I'd heard of it, but didn't didn't fear it because I didn't think it really would apply to me, I suppose.
Yeah, and that's interesting, isn't it? Because again, I got sick right at the start of the pandemic, so long COVID. I invented long COVID.
Yeah,
Should I be so bold as to say that, I was kind of right at the start of that. So, long COVID kind of developed, I guess, alongside my experience, because when I first had it, I think the term long COVID didn't actually start being talked about until was it summer that year? I can't actually remember. Anyway, it was a little beyond that. But as you say, things like ME existed before. Other post-viral conditions existed before, and you said you actually had some experience of sort of post-viral conditions before. Um, but I don't know. I mean, I didn't make the connection. And I think I also was quote unquote fit, healthy,
yeah,
completely not at risk for any of this. I don't need to worry about this. Oh, I got COVID. Oh, okay, well, that's a bit of a waste of time when I could be outside. But there was no,
yeah,
like, for me, no real worry about it until it started getting worse and worse and all of that. So it is interesting, isn't it? The kind of narrative around that, I guess, even. Some people did have this massive fear of it, whereas some people were, like you and I, sort of quite blasé about it almost
yeah,
initially. Um,
absolutely. And I am glad. I mean, one really positive thing is I feel like obviously long COVID has shined such a spotlight on those conditions that just said have been around for a
yeah,
while. And it kind of makes me sad and sad that, you know, people didn't have that level of understanding about their condition and the support that we have now because it's everyone's heard of long COVID now. So it's sort of people are more accepting of it. Yes, they can't understand, and nobody can understand unless you've actually been through it, even those that live with us and see it. I think you just can't explain the gravity of it. But I am pleased that, it's a lot more well known. And I kind of feel for, my aunt who experienced it at a time where the perception was that, you're making this up.
yeah.
It's you can't see it, so it's very difficult to explain.
We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops, and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that is it's a really good point about the visibility of it. I think a lot of people, I mean, I would agree with this, when I was unwell, and I think people now who are still unwell would say it does feel invisible. But I think it is a lot more visible than it was. It's
Yeah,
still ways to go there, I think, but absolutely. And, that it's talked about a lot more, but also that, yeah, I think unless you've had some experience of it yourself, you can't understand it. You can't understand that, that some days you literally can't lift your head off the pillow.
yeah,
That actually standing up and walking to the kitchen could knock you out for days sometimes, and these sorts of things. Or also that, doing one thing might be fine, but doing the other isn't. And I think, there's a lot of narrative around employers and family members and all of this sort of stuff that it's very, very difficult because people don't understand it. But yeah, absolutely. So you said that you had fatigue was a big symptom for you. What did your sort of, were there anything else around you sort of, as you sort of started to move into long COVID, that showed up for you, kind of symptom wise, I suppose?
honestly, not really. I think initially I had 2 weeks off work, and I think I'd never felt fatigue like that. I could still walk, but I was just absolutely wiped out. And the most
Mm.
similar experience I can compare it to is having the flu. And I think after a couple of, in fact, maybe I ended up having a month off work, because of, I had brain fog as well, actually.
Mm.
So I remember just finding interactions incredibly draining. So I think a couple of weeks into the COVID, I think my aunt and uncle had had popped by. I was staying with my mum at the time, and I love seeing them. I love interacting with them, and I just remember having to. I think I was lying down, sort of on the sofa, and they were sat at the table, but having to remove myself even from the room just because I couldn't follow the conversation anymore, and it just felt so draining. Um, so yeah, that's something I've never experienced before, that fatigue from kind of discussion and that mental drainage. So those were really the two main things that I had. I didn't have any chest symptoms, or gut symptoms. It was really just the fatigue and the brain fog that went along with that.
Yeah, but I mean, not to minimize that because
No,
fatigue is absolutely crushing, isn't it?
yes,
Um, and again, I'm looking back on this. I've been recovered now for about 18 months or so, and it's almost hard to remember how
yeah,
exhausting that fatigue was. Now being fortunate enough to be out of it. So it's, yeah, absolutely sort of devastating, I think, isn't it?
yeah. I hate the
Certainly when it's
word
at its worst.
fatigue. That
Mm,
that word, because it doesn't convey how absolutely
yeah.
debilitating it is. And I think a lot of people kind of consider fatigue as being tired. It's not. You feel it in every cell of your body. It's, I don't know, like wading through concrete. I haven't been able to come up with kind of a simple way of explaining it, because for me but it's totally debilitating. And as you say, how can you even fathom not being able to lift your head up, or, you know, at my worst, sometimes I couldn't lift my arms up to eat. And it's almost beyond imagination for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. It is beyond imagination unless you have experienced it. Um, yeah, I think one of the most hurtful things that was said to me was, I was absolutely wiped out, so fatigued, really. I think I was trying to sit at the table to eat and I just couldn't, it was head on the table kind of territory. And in being asked what's wrong, and I just I could barely kind of explain what was going on, that I was so tired, I was so fatigued, and being said, oh yeah, I get a bit tired sometimes too, and just I couldn't even say anything because I was too exhausted to even have that argument, to have that discussion. But it just felt so hurtful and so
Yeah.
dismissive. And in hindsight, I think that person was probably trying to be nice and trying to relate to my experience, and say, "Oh yeah, isn't it terrible when you get tired? It's really it's really exhausting, kind of thing." But obviously, for somebody who hadn't had that experience of something like long COVID, where you have that, bone crushing fatigue, where you can't lift your head up, it kind of adds insult to injury, doesn't it? I think,
Yeah,
um, for sure. Yeah,
absolutely.
but yeah, I agree. Like the word fatigue, and it's the same with brain fog as well. The word does not adequately sort of describe the experience, I think, at all. For sure. Um, so yeah, what did you find that helped, I suppose, and was there a kind of a timeline of finding things or even doing the wrong things, which was what I did. I did all the wrong things first. So yeah, how did your experience go of kind of finding things that helped or didn't?
So I think I went back to work after a month, and it was definitely too soon in hindsight. And I think I was just keen. I was bored. I'm, as kind of mentioned, not someone who was comfortable sitting around. So I think I definitely went back to work too quickly. And what followed for me was a number of months of a very much a boom and bust cycle. So I experienced that classic post-exertional malaise, PEM crashes in chronic fatigue. And I think for ages I didn't really understand the pattern myself. It took a lot of hindsight and um, eventually a major crash that really just stopped me in my tracks, um, to kind of to understand that. But it was such a tough process because you one day you're feeling better, um, and because you've been unwell for so long, you want to do things. You want to. I mean, I'm not saying sort of big things, but if I had a day where I was feeling slightly better, I wanted to go for a walk or be outside or have a little dance to music in the car, no matter how, restrained that might have been, but just to kind of feel normal again. And I remember my partner, because he would, witness this sort of pattern and probably had better insight than it to me because he could see it, and I kind of living it and feeling it wasn't able, I don't know, to see it as clearly, but he would caution me and say, but it's great that you're feeling better, but just try and conserve your energy, and things like that. And it's so difficult because 24 hours later, I would get that crash, that extreme worsening of symptoms, and the mental roller coaster that you go through with that, from feeling so happy to feeling a little bit better to, oh my God, I can't walk again, and that crushing kind of feeling that you get because you're back down at rock bottom and you just experienced the feeling of feeling a bit better. So I think, yeah, that roller coaster was really, really tough. And eventually my body just completely shut down. And so I guess with hindsight, it's knowing that actually that change of attitude, as you kind of said at the start, is rest is good, it's healthy, it's productive. I didn't rest properly. I didn't give my body that time that it needed. And I think that partly resulted in my enduring symptoms. So I think learning to rest was key, and properly rest. Not reading, well, not that I could really read a book at that time, but not watching a crime drama on TV that's going to set your body into fight and flight. It's actually learning to meditate, to be still, to do some breath work. So that was really key, for me. Um, yeah, I think I had for a number of months being part of sort of Facebook support groups and things like that. And I found them t quite detrimental because there were a lot of people posting about the fact that they'd had symptoms for 2 or 3 years by that point. And that was terrifying to me because I just thought, oh my God, I can't, this can't be it. This can't be my life for a long period of time, particularly when I was, because I had been so active. Um, so I left those support groups just because of the sort of mental pressure. And I got really into a place of, I guess, quite deep depression and not a positive outlook. And I think it was Christmas, kind of the Christmas, that first Christmas after the July that I got it, so 6 months or so after catching COVID. And my family had known about my condition, obviously, but they hadn't really seen me when I'd had my crashes and I was home for Christmas. And so my family was really visibly witnessing it for the first time. And I remember my mum saying to me, "Look, Lizzie, you just have to be positive about this." And I remember saying, "Mum, how can you expect me to be positive? I can't walk." Um, and yeah, so it's, those sorts of conversations are really challenging. But around that time, I'd been able to sort of, my brain fog had lifted a little bit. I was able to do some research. And a massive sort of cornerstone in my recovery was actually just knowledge. And that kind of in the subsequent um, change in mental attitude and belief. So I learnt about the mind-body connection. And for me, understanding kind of what was happening in terms of biology and the nervous system, which I could just absolutely resonated with me. That was really key because I said, once I understood, yeah, this is biology, this is my body sort of in fight, was in fight and flight, probably was in fight and flight for a really long time before I got COVID, and that was the final straw. It just completely made sense to me. And once I understood that, I was able to change my attitude and actually, for the first time, believe I was going to recover because just, I guess, knowledge is power. And yeah, you understand a reason for what's happening. So I could sort of understand that, it was going to get better. This was very eloquently written in Jan Rothney's book, Breaking Free from Long COVID and Chronic Fatigue. And I have to say that book was absolutely transformational in my recovery because she explained the nervous system really well. And then she went on to explain lots of techniques to kind of slowly and safely recover. And I used a lot of her learning kind of in my recovery. Um, so that was sort of fundamental, just that understanding. And I'm a massive believer now in the mind-body connection and how, what we're thinking, how that can influence our symptoms, and the belief. And so remarkably, I was really quite quickly able to go from despair to really believing that I was going to recover. And I actually got better really quickly once I'd had that mindset shift and then followed some of the techniques that Jan mentions, and also um, some of the techniques that I picked up in the app Curable, which was sort of initially designed for sufferers with kind of chronic pain, but can equally be applied to chronic fatigue and other autoimmune conditions and things like that. So that was kind of really the fundamentals of what changed. I think just reflecting something that didn't work so well for me. When I hit that rock bottom, and I think I spoke to a GP or somebody recommended that, there's all these analogies with sort of spoons and chronic fatigue and the energy levels that you have. And I started trying to conserve energy by counting the number of steps that I did. And it would kind of be well, if I can stay under 1,000 steps, then I'm going to be okay and I won't crash, because I just feared that crash so much. Um, but actually, I think this was really detrimental to me and actually caused me to start having some other symptoms. So when I was doing that, what is this arbitrary threshold of 1,000 steps? If I had 1,001 or 1,002 steps, I'd be terrified that I'd overdone it. But actually, I understood with hindsight that that is putting my body back in fight and flight because I'm scared that I've gone over. That leads then to a crash because your body's back in fight and flight. And then when I'd get the crash, I'd be distraught, like, absolutely gutted, emotional, and that's firing off more negative signals to your brain, which then just reinforces it. So it's a vicious circle. But at that time, months after I'd had COVID, I started to develop heart palpitations, which I hadn't had previously. I'd have an absolutely racing heart, even at rest or, in the middle of the night. I remember shaking my partner one night and kind of, well, yeah, it's sort of ridiculous now because, of course, that probably wouldn't have been the symptoms, but I thought I was having or going to have a heart attack because I'd never experienced palpitations like that. Um, and I think that was just my body in fight and flight because your heart is racing. There's, they're classic symptoms of when your body's, you know, um, in olden times getting prepared to run away from the lion. Um, so that all kind of fits in with now my understanding of the nervous system. So I think, yeah, it's all well and, advice around conserving your energy. Of course, you have to rest, but I think it's more important to listen to your body and to do things when you're feeling able to do them. And that's really kind of the message of Jan Rothney's book. And she says to sort of safely increase your activity when you're feeling well, and, and to crucially only have positive experiences. So, and then to really reinforce how successful that's been, and just remind yourself that actually, you can do this. I think, I don't know if it was a mantra that she had in her book or something that I came up with. I can't remember, but I've walked every day of my life. There is nothing, there's no reason I can't do it again. And when I was feeling well, I would start to increase my activity levels and then celebrate afterwards. Say, I had a shower standing up today, and yell about it. At the end of the day, I made a cup of tea today for the first time because my partner's had to bring it to me for however many months, and just really over emphasize and exaggerate that celebration. And she really talks about this in her book because that's relaying those kind of positive experiences in your brain that will start to replace the negative wiring that's happened, been happening for a number of months. Because of course your brain learns, you know, reactions. So if you're going through a boom and bust cycle of activity and then 24 hours out, 4 hours later, a crash, your brain is learning activity is bad. Activity causes fatigue. And so you have to sort of, or my view and Jan's view, and, you know, a lot of research out there is you can rewire that and retrain your brain to teach you that activity is safe. But you've got to do that in a sort of measured way.
We'll be right back. Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really, really need it. So please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much. Yeah, and it's all about the body feeling safe, isn't it?
Yeah.
So increasing things super quickly is probably not going to make your body feel safe. Quite apart from the fact that, I'm going to drop the D word, deconditioning.
Yeah.
If we are not moving for a long period of time, then we are deconditioned. So if we were to increase activity too quickly, then our body is going to struggle. So there's kind of like, both side of it, isn't it? It's that safety in our body, but also, you got to build slowly. You don't go to the gym and suddenly lift the biggest weights. You start with the smaller ones, and work up to it, don't you? Yeah, and I love I love so much about what you're saying about listening to the body, because I agree. I mean, I don't want to demonize anything that people are finding helpful,
Yeah.
but I always caution people with things like, wearables,
Yes.
because they can be very useful to help people kind of work things out, maybe short term, but I do worry about maybe people using them longer term because, exactly for the reason that you said, and also the ones that beep at you. When it starts beeping at you, that is a very strong signal of danger, isn't it? I think, it's always, for me, it's always feeling first. Data can be very, very helpful, but always feeling first, I think, and learning that, what feels good in your body, for me anyway. So you mentioned Jan's book, and I'll make sure that a link to that goes into the show notes for anyone that hasn't come across it and wants to look it up. And you mentioned the celebrating wins, and I think this is so important, to celebrate the wins and to look for the little good in things, because when we're
Absolutely.
not well for such a long time, and it's such an awful, awful experience, all we see is bad because there is
Yeah.
so much bad. Let's face it, there's tons and tons of bad. We're feeling awful. We can't do anything. Nothing's helping. Is this going to be my life forever? All of these thoughts that are going through our heads because that is the reality that we're kind of living, and then starting to look for those little glimmers, even if it's just like, hey, the sun's shining today. That's a big glimmer in Scotland. um or whatever those things are, and those little wins, it's such a ridiculously small little win that maybe you were able to sit up in bed, but actually, you know what, if you've not sat up in bed for 6 months, that's huge.
Yeah.
There's nothing little about that, is it? And it's coming back to, the kind of, we were talking earlier about rest being productive, and this kind of change in, I don't know if you want to call it mindset, or, just the kind of the way we look at things, which kind of is mindset, isn't it? That rest isn't evil, rest isn't bad, rest isn't lazy. And that actually, if you can now do something that you couldn't do before, that's not pathetic and little and not worth celebrating. That is absolutely massive. And you should, shout it out, and
Definitely.
really, really celebrate that, because it may seem small and insignificant to somebody else who doesn't have your experience, who sits up in bed every morning. Um, but for you, that's huge.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of, I don't know. I mean, we're both from the UK, and we have this kind of like thing where we don't want to celebrate, we don't want to shout out, we don't want to, kind of be proud of ourselves in public, because that's, kind of, that's not what you do. But I think so much about this is actually coming out of that shell and saying, yes, you know what, I did this thing today, and wasn't that wonderful that I did it? I think that's really cool. Um,
And the more you
yeah.
focus on those positive things, it's like a muscle, isn't it? They say with sort of
Mm.
gratitude and positivity, the more good you then see once you start. And it can be difficult at first because, you might feel there's not much to be positive about when you're like that. But if you keep up that practice, you see it in more, you see it everywhere. I think language is also really important. And I think this was a technique or a tool that was on the Curable app that I worked through. And they sort of suggested sometimes changing the language that you were kind of talking about your symptoms. And so, for example, instead of saying, "Oh my God, I feel so awful and fatigued today," they suggested changing your language to something like, "Okay, I feel less energized than I would like to today." And the power of kind of changing those words, because the nervous system, the amygdala, the sort of fear sensor, that's picking up on so many subtleties, which can sort of reinforce or improve symptoms. So it's even picking up on, how you're talking to yourself, your inner voice, all of these things can make a difference. And I found that incredibly powerful and sort of almost magical because I can't remember where it was from. And again, it might have been in Jan's book, but she actually or talked about an amygdala pep talk. Um, and I found this, as I say, almost like magic, um, whereby, you're trying to override that um, sensor. And she said, even your tone of voice, the way you're speaking about things has an impact. So I used to do a mantra when I felt fatigue coming on, and I could almost sometimes feel that coming on. And there were certain triggers you mentioned earlier, holding your head up, sitting at a table. When I was first really ill, I couldn't hold my head up. And I actually found that um, even like months down the line, as soon as I sat at a table, I almost felt fatigue coming on because it had learned and remembered that experience of not being able to hold my head up. And I remember being a little bit better and being out to dinner for my mum's birthday and sat at the table and felt fatigue coming on. And so I did this mantra where I'd say in my head over and over again, kind of very calm, clear, or sort of almost authoritative, I am safe. Thank you, body, for trying to protect me with this fatigue, but I just don't need it. I am safe. And just repeating those sorts of things very calmly over and over again. And honestly, I got up from that meal and walked away from the table. So I stopped the fatigue in its tracks. And even saying it to you now, it seems unbelievable, but like I absolutely experienced it. So it just demonstrates that power of words, and it sort of also reinforces all of the kind of learning and understanding I had about the nervous system and the body, I guess, because, as we were saying before, you can kind of get into this vicious cycle when your symptoms are bad, if you're distraught about it and crying and in despair, that's not, yeah, I completely get that you need some time to kind of process that, but also the the more quickly you can move on and focus again sort of on your recovery, the more quickly your symptoms are going to resolve, in my experience anyway. So I learnt to be able to, if I did feel fatigue again after I'd had a couple of good days, actually be quite sort of philosophical about it and not get too upset. And I found then that my crashes weren't nearly as long. And then quite soon I wasn't experiencing any crashes. So um, it is, yeah, incredibly interesting. And as I say, for me, that mindset shift, that belief, the change in language, really, I think was absolutely key to my recovery.
Yeah, and it sounds ridiculous almost, doesn't it, when you say, "Oh, I just did this little thing and it had such an impact on me." But it's like finding your strategies, whatever your
Yeah.
strategies are, and then practicing them. because practice makes progress.
Yeah.
And then the first time that you put it into practice in a situation where you really need it, so you're finding yourself feeling fatigued, or you're heading into that fight flight and things are maybe getting a bit out of control, or whatever that situation is, and you use your technique that you've practiced, and oh my goodness, it worked. Whether it's a strategy that you've mentioned, whether it's a breathwork strategy, whether it's, whatever that strategy is, you use it. And it's that proof, isn't it? It's proof to yourself, okay, there's something in this. Okay, this one thing is probably not the entire story, but this one thing is helping me. So I'm on the right track. I've found things that are helping. I'm seeing that improvement, which means I can see more improvement. And it's kind of building that confidence in recovery, I think, isn't it? That you can keep seeing that improvement. Because, I think it might have been Dan Neuffer that was saying more than belief in recovery, it's confidence in recovery. And I think that's what you get, isn't it? You might have that
Yeah.
belief, and that is important. But through that belief, through doing the work, through trying the strategies, and through finding these things that do help and are having these positive influences on you, that is where you start to build that confidence. And I think the two kind of work together really beautifully, don't they?
Yeah.
Um, so, what did that kind of like final sort of march up to the recovery line look like for you? How did you kind of how did you get across the line, and how did you know that was that? How did you know that you were recovered?
So it really was very quick for me. Once I un I'd read Jan's book, kind of understood the nervous system. I think I was still quite mindful that, of course, your body does need rest. So I was very disciplined. And I set up quite a good structure because I needed some sort of structure to my day, I think, because I was off work. Um, and so I kind of set myself quite a good routine, which included a lot of rest. Um, and that just made me feel as well that even if it's sort of little things that you're doing, even just saying, okay, well, for this hour, because I'm feeling a little bit better, I might watch an episode of whatever my favorite show or do a meditation. At the end of the day, I would then kind of almost have that sense of achievement, or I've been productive just because I've stuck to my routine, even though I've done really nothing all day. You kind of get that sense of accomplishment. And I think that was also important for me at that time. Um, and so I kind of set myself this routine, and as I say, had lots of periods of rest in it. And but I quite quickly started pushing the activity boundaries when I was feeling well, and celebrating those going into doing them with kind of utter confidence, as you say, because that's so important. That it was, going to be successful. Didn't I tried to bat away kind of doubt, or not think about kind of in terms of I'm overdoing it. I tried to remove kind of those fears. Um, and I think I sort of increased my activity level, tried to sort of baseline that for a few days and then increased it so that it was measured. But within a month or so from being at a point where at the Christmas dinner table, I had to be carried from the table to lie down because I couldn't lift my arms to eat my Christmas dinner. Um, a month or so later, I was up and about, walking around, started running again, which was amazing because that had been sort of a great passion of mine before I got COVID, and also a way of de-stressing. And that's the awful thing, isn't it? Because in COVID, you are at your most stressed, you're at fight and flight, you're in despair, and you've also lost the normal tools that you would have used to combat stress. So you're kind of in a double whammy.
I can relate, absolutely.
Um, so, and then that just exponentially things happen when you can then had more of those tools at your disposal. So as I say, it was actually remarkably quick for me, but I think I learned a good lesson in that I gave myself a month, even after I was feeling pretty much better, before I went back to work. And I never would have done that previously, but I just wanted to absolutely consolidate what I'd done. And that's advice I give to people now who are going through long COVID is just, I know how it feels to want to rush back, and also that kind of guilt sometimes that you feel of what are my colleagues and my employer thinking, because, they see me, you can't see the fatigue, or if they see me on a good day, they might question how sick I really am. I think that all kind of lays on a pressure to return. And I guess the biggest advice or learning that I had was your health is the most important thing, and just give yourself more time, because if we rush back into doing things, often we end up being out for longer because we haven't given us that initial time. And that's just been a massive learning curve for me. And I think I'm so much more balanced in everything that I do now. My priorities have shifted. I used to be the person that when I'd go out for a lunchtime run, say on a Tuesday, and I wanted to get a personal best. I was always like pushing myself to my limits. And, you know, that can be good, but it can also be really detrimental, that pressure that you're putting on yourself, and also take a lot of enjoyment out of life because, you know, is it that much fun to run if you constantly want to be improving and you're conscious of your time? Now, when I run, I don't run with a watch, so I don't know how long I've done something in, and it's more just about enjoying being outside and running in nature. And also, of course, although I say I'm recovered now, I my fitness levels are not what they were before COVID, and I'm not sure whether I'll ever be able to do the kind of same physical amount of physical activity that I did before. And there's an acceptance journey in that to kind of, make peace with the fact that, you are a different person now. Um, and there's sort of no point comparing yourself to your former abilities because you've changed, and that's not a bad thing. I think it's a really good thing. I'm almost at the point where I'm glad that this happened to me because I think I'm just a much more balanced person. Maybe not such a steep learning curve, but I definitely think I've gained so much from it.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way of looking at it because, I mean, some people say they're grateful for their illness. Different people who've recovered say different versions of this.
Yeah,
And I remember someone saying that to me, they'd recovered and I was maybe halfway through my journey at the time. And in hindsight, obviously, I didn't know that at the time. And she said, "Oh, yeah, no, I'm really grateful for my experience because I'm a much better person now. And, I love my life." And I was just like, how can you possibly say that? I'm in the middle of this experience that I don't know if I'll come out of. And, I was feeling pretty hopeless at that point. So, it's something I think that you make your peace with afterwards, and
yes,
you put your own stamp on what that is. And, I think I'm now come round to the point where I'm not grateful for the experience because it was the worst thing I've ever been
yeah,
through, but I am very grateful for the lessons that I've learned and the me that has come out the other side because, Jackie 2.0 is a lot better than the Jackie that got sick in the first place. I just am healthier and happier in every way. And I think that's a very personal thing. Everyone has their own kind of take on that, and that's absolutely fine. And if you are in the depths of long COVID or MECFS and you're thinking, I can't contemplate how that might feel, I think it comes, because I certainly couldn't think like that until I'd been recovered for a while. I think
yeah,
it was a good sort of later on after recovery that sort of started to come back to me, I think. But something you said there about your health being the most important thing that we have. I very much relate to, I think we take it for granted, don't we? I think often, until we get put in this situation where we don't have our health. It's taken from us, and we just feel that sense of grief and loss and hopelessness. And I think one thing that I am very, very grateful for now, every single moment of every single day, is my health. And it almost seems like miraculous that I have
Yeah.
it back, even though, it was that experience that I went through in order to have it back. But yeah, I think, you have this different outlook, I think, having been through something like this, which I don't know. It's a nice outlook to have. I just wish we could have it without the experience.
Yeah, no,
That's
you're
life,
right.
isn't
And
it?
yeah, and yeah. On reflection, your way of articulating that was much better than me. I think you're right that
Um,
it takes you have to go beyond the illness and have a period of recovery before you can unlock some of these insights. And I think what you just said there about the grief and the loss, I think at the time I didn't really understand or couldn't put a name to some of the feelings that I was feeling because you're so depressed. But it is grief and
yeah,
loss because you were grieving for the person that you were before COVID. And it's incredibly painful, that sense of loss. And I think
yeah,
if I could kind of give some advice to people, it's also just to be kind to yourself through that process
yeah,
because it's there's a there's a lot of emotion and also I've since actually been to therapy um to kind of unlock and unpick some of this. And I think if you're in a position to do that, I'd recommend it because I think it's almost uh, you're almost experienced a trauma through the COVID and the long COVID and even those around you. And I think it is worth recognizing the gravity of what you've been through and giving yourself time to explore and process that properly. It's not a case of, okay, great, I'm better now. You've been through a monumental journey. And yeah, as you say, it takes some time to get there and you need that reflection. But it is, yeah, I'm glad that I've sort of given myself time properly to explore that.
yeah. I would agree. I think, therapy is not the magic cure. It's not going to cure everything, but it makes everything a hell of a lot easier. If you have a handle on some of that stuff with a big S.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, for sharing your story, for bearing your soul, for putting yourself through that again, to help everyone with a little bit of hope, and some maybe ideas to look at. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so great to chat to someone that relates, and if, you know, even one thing resonates with someone else, then I'm pleased.
Thank you so much to all of my guests and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch. I'd love to hear